Then on Sports Central, we go over our next schedule preview of this offseason, and it's going to be over the Clemson Tigers, one of the most significant teams that was in a rebuilding phase in the 2021 season. And kind of a surprise, of course, seeing Clemson, a team that's been such a big national contender over the past decade, especially have a down season. But, of course, especially, considering how much talent this team lost after 2020, it makes total sense now why this team did have a rebuilding season in 2021. But how this team be in 2022 is what we'll be going over here today. We'll be going over the players that this team will be losing, who they'll be returning, and also looking at their schedule for the first time this offseason, starting out with some notable games from last season. And this team was 10-3 overall, which overall, that record is, getting up to 10 wins for any team is a huge accomplishment. There's a lot of teams that would only hope to get up to 10 wins. So, for Clemson, it wasn't a terrible year. They started out the season 2-2, so it definitely wasn't the start that they had hoped for, that's for sure. But, Clemson, of course, over the course of the season, you could definitely consider this team to be the most improved team of the 2021 season. They started out the year and their offense was just horrible. And honestly, that was kind of the theme of this team over the course of 2021 was their offense was just horrible, but their defense was top tier, which their defense was phenomenal all season long. It's just the offense that kind of came back to bite a bit. But for Clemson, this is a team that really improved over the course of the 2021 season. They lost to Georgia by 7 in the opener, which, of course, Georgia, your national champion. So, that was actually a pretty close game considering that. This team did lose to NC State in several overtimes. That was a tough loss. But after that game, this team, they did lose to Pitt. But, especially after that Pitt loss, this team really started to look good. They beat Florida State 30-20. Beat Wake Forest 48-27. Demon Deacons were a top 10 team at the time, and Clemson shut them down. Beat South Carolina, a pretty good football team, by the way, 30-0, and they beat Iowa State in their bowl game 20-13. So once again, this team improved drastically over the course of the season. Once again, from start to finish, this team only got better. So that's definitely a sign for the future as we look forward to 2022, is that this team, they improved a lot over 2021, and the returning production overall looks really good, I would say, for this Clemson team. Looking at them offensively, you got DJ Uiagalelei coming back, which is a good return. Your starting quarterback, of course, last season. But, I don't know if he's the quarterback for the future of this Clemson football team. Last year, this offense really struggled, and Uiagalelei definitely had an underwhelming season, to say the least, which is tough. Following up on what Trevor Lawrence did for this football team, those are some big shoes to fill there for Uiagalelei. But his stats, they were pretty terrible, I'll be honest. 2,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, and a 55% completion rate. So, pretty poor stats last season for Uiagalelei. He had more interceptions than touchdowns last season, but he is somewhat of a dual-threat quarterback, put up 300 yards of rushing and 4 touchdowns as well, but his passing game is definitely poor. And, of course, at the quarterback position, you got a couple of the transfers. You got Hunter Johnson coming in from Northwestern. That'll be good to see if he can compete for that starting position. He's going to compete for that starting position. It's just a matter of if he wins it or not, so we'll see what happens as this offseason rolls along. But backfield looks really good going to next season. Will Shipley coming back. Same thing with Kobe Pace. Both running backs combined for over 1,600 yards of offense last season and 17 touchdowns. So, that's definitely something to look forward to in that backfield going into next season. And receiving core overall looks, I would say, pretty good as well. Justin Ross, you do lose him, so that's a tough loss. But otherwise, you got Bo Collins coming back. You got Joseph Nagata coming back, and Dakari Collins as well. All three of those receivers had some influence on this team last season for sure. So receiving core looks good. Backfield looks good. Quarterback situation definitely intriguing going into next season. But this offense should improve for sure going into next year. This offense was, once again, that was the big killer of this football team last year. Their defense was top tier. Their defense could have brought them to a national championship for sure, but their offense was just poor, and it just could not get it done. So that was kind of their issue for a good chunk of last season. Tight end Galloway's gone. You lose 1 defensive lineman, 2 linebackers, and 3 in the secondary. So defensively now you're losing some key starters. So this defense potentially going into next season is going to have to rebuild theirs. So lots of question marks for Clemson going into next season. And this is a team that I said just a few weeks ago, you know what, Clemson, they'll be a team to really watch out for once again next year. And I do think this team will be a contender in the ACC, but there definitely are some concerns on this football team going into next year with the amount of defensive starters you're losing. That secondary is going to be tough. But overall, the depth defensively is good. But once again, offensively, this team still has a few question marks as well. So definitely a tough team to predict going into the 2022 season. But is this team the ACC favorite in 2022 or going into it? I would say they're probably up there for me. They're probably one of 2 or 3 teams I do think will be your main contenders, and that would probably be Clemson, NC State, and probably maybe Wake Forest, especially Clemson and NC State. Those are the 2 teams that I'm really keeping an eye on going into next season in the ACC. But looking at your transfer portal and recruiting going into next season, your transfer portal, this team has been very active in with losing players. I mean, they've gained a couple, but they've lost a lot of players to the transfer portal the past few weeks and months. Of course, you got a receiver going to South Florida, Charleston, safety going to Missouri, Jeffries, defensive lineman going to Minnesota. You got an offensive lineman going to Georgia Tech as well. Hunter Johnson, mentioned him before. He's coming in from Northwestern, so that's going to be good to have him in there to potentially compete for that starting position. And Thornton, another safety, another one in the backfield going to South Florida. So lots of losses for Clemson in the transfer portal, but recruiting-wise, that's a bright spot on this football team. They're actually ranked number 10 in the nation for recruiting. So that's definitely something that's a very big positive going into the future, is that the recruiting class looks good. They're ranked number 1 in the ACC. They got 2 5-star recruits coming in and 8 4-stars as well. So that's definitely a positive going into next season. But that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. You start off the season, of course, on the 5th against Georgia Tech on the road. Furman, Louisiana Tech, both at home. You got Wake Forest on the road. You got NC State at home. That's going to be a huge game there. Very important football game there. And once again, as I mentioned before, I think NC State is the other team. Clemson and NC State, I think, are my 2 big teams that I'm high on in the ACC right now. So that'll be a tough one. Boston College on the road, Florida State on the road, Syracuse at home, Notre Dame on the road, and then you got Louisville, Miami, and South Carolina to finish out the season. So, I mean, your non-conference games are pretty split up within your schedule. Notre Dame, of course, is going to be a tough one, as always, on the road, and they should be a decent football team. In South Carolina, watch out for the Gamecocks going into next season. Spencer Rattler coming in, Stogner as well. So, talent looks pretty good for the Gamecocks going into next year. But that said, let's look at your first 6 games going into next year. Georgia Tech, Furman, and Louisiana Tech, I do expect to be all. I'm pretty confident that Clemson wins all 3 of those games there. But once you get into Wake Forest, NC State, and Boston College, I do want to favor Clemson in all 3 of those games right now. So, I mean, these aren't official predictions quite yet. I'll be predicting this team's schedule game by game once we get to late spring and into summer. But I do want to favor Clemson in all 3 of those games right now. But definitely, Wake Forest is going to be tough going on the road. I mean, Wake Forest offense in particular looks especially good going into next season, and NC State is once again another team that I really think is a dark horse going into next year, so that'll be tough. And then Boston College on the road, never know about that team. Potentially that's a tough one on the road as well. And at the second half of the schedule, Florida State on the road, that's going to be close as well. I do want to favor Clemson in that game too. Syracuse, I do think, is a fairly easy win with it being in Clemson, and Syracuse probably won't be a very good football team. Notre Dame on the road, kind of a different story. That's a tough one. It's coming after your bye week, so you will be a bit more rested up going into that game, whether that's a good thing or not. But for Notre Dame, that's a football team I do think will be once again a contender next season. They got a good recruiting class coming in, some good depth, and they do lose some key starters offensively, so there is a bit of unpredictability there for Notre Dame going into next season. Clemson's got a lot of that too, but Notre Dame, I'm going to favor the Irish in that game right now, and obviously that game is still a long ways away, but I'm going to favor the Irish in that game as of right now. Louisville, Miami, and South Carolina, I'm going to favor Clemson in all 3 of those games too, but definitely close ones. Tough to predict all 3 of those games, especially that South Carolina one. Keep an eye on that. The Gamecocks are a team that I think could get up to 8 or 9 wins for sure next season. So I think South Carolina's going to be a pretty good team, so probably won't be quite as easy of a game facing off against the Gamecocks this time around coming up in 2022. But record prediction, 10-2 to 12-0 for the Tigers. I do think this team is once again a national contender next year. I mean, there are a lot of question marks, though. This is a team that I'm not too confident in with predicting, mainly because, offensively they had so many issues last year, and defensively now they're losing some key starters going into next season. So definitely, this is a football team that's got tremendous potential. Just a matter of whether or not they can capitalize on that and get some big wins. But that's it. Let me know your thoughts and comments below on this Clemson team, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.